Hi, and welcome to the Fair Perspectives Podcast, the official podcast of the pro-human movement, brought to you by the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Today, we speak with Michael Shermer, who is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, the host of The Michael Shermer Show, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University, where he teaches the class Skepticism 101. For 18 years, he was a monthly columnist at Scientific American. He's the author of several New York Times bestsellers, including Why People Believe Weird Things, The Believing Brain, Why Darwin Matters, The Moral Arc, and more. In this episode, we discuss conspiracy theories, group identities and differences, tribalism, systematic racism, religion, and more. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Michael Shermer.
Michael Shermer, thank you for joining us.
Nice to see you. Nice to be here. Nice to kick off the week here.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great start for sure. So much, I'm sure Melissa as well, but so much I want to talk to you about. There's so much that there is to talk about. But one thing that really struck me just prepping for this, I watched this TED Talk that you did. The video said 13 years ago. I'm not sure if that's just the video or that's when you did it.
No, that was 2006 was my first TED Talk in Monterey when TED was still small, and there were no videos. In fact, they recorded our talks, and then like a year later, they said, "Hey, we're thinking about this crazy idea of posting the talks online." And it's like, well, okay, let's see how that goes. And it went big, it went huge.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah. And they had a little bit of an intro saying, we're trying this crazy thing where we're going to show you what it was like. But you had this great energy, and you kind of even kicked it off with this kind of carnival barker type thing. Like, we are skeptics, we debunk and deframe, and all these this great spiel that you had. And then you get into a few things like, you use this ridiculous $900 marijuana dowsing rod that was being sold to teachers, and you talk about the Virgin Mary on a piece of toast and all that kind of stuff. And something
I have it really right here.
Yeah, there it is.
I have it right here. I keep it handy in case I can detect you guys. All right, there's something going on here, right there. Yeah, it's too funny.
Right. So the thing that really struck me, I'm watching it, I'm laughing, I'm loving what you're saying. I'm totally with you, of course. And the crowd is loving it. And you have this kind of, there's such a lighthearted feel to so much of what you were saying, even though there's incredible substance there. But the thing that really struck me, especially because it's been quite a while, the thing that really struck me was that this kind of used to be fun. It kind of used to be, the things that we're combating are almost overwhelmingly considered silly. These things like, it's very fringe, very kind of small minorities who are really into this stuff. And the vast majority of people can kind of chuckle about it, but we're not really in that situation right now. We're in a different kind of mode where the situation seems much more dire and the stakes seem so much higher, even though the level of stuff that we're debunking is kind of intellectually the same. It's just as silly and just as ridiculous, but it doesn't feel as lighthearted. Like, I don't imagine you'd do a similar TED Talk where has that many laughs. I'm curious what you think about that.
My talks now are more directed toward conspiracy theories and why people believe them. In fact, that's my next big book, which I just turned into the publisher, and it'll be out next summer. Basically, this has become serious. They're in the White House. They're in the Capitol Dome. The rigged election is a conspiracy theory. QAnon, that's a conspiracy theory. And all the elements of those, which have parts that have come before from previous conspiracy theories, all kind of woven into one. And clearly it's not. You said it perfectly. It's not just, a handful of fringe nutballs with their tinfoil hats, blogging out of their parents' basement. This is, the top officials. Congress people. The president himself was a kind of conspiracist in chief. And this gets at my life's work of, trying to understand why people believe weird things, the title of my first book. Well, that's a weird thing, QAnon. So what's going on there? And so I explore that theme in the next book, that it's a kind of a proxy conspiracism, I call it, that QAnon is a stand-in for something else, because no one could possibly believe that Hillary Clinton is leading this secret satanic pedophile cult out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., with the help of Tom Hanks and Beyonce. I mean, this is just Looney Tunes. Right. And but so when Republicans, and it's mostly Republicans, something like a third say that, they think it's possible that QAnon conspiracy theory is true. Can they really believe that? I mean, really? I mean, what does it mean to believe something? Well, one guy did, Edgar Welch. He went there with a gun, with an AR style rifle to shoot up the place to rescue the children. I mean, he believed it, and he was quite shocked when he got there and discovered there's no basement at the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C., much less a pedophile ring. He shot up in the ceiling. He went to jail for a few years, but and then was apologetic and kind of said, I went down the rabbit hole of believing this stuff. But I think when someone like a Ted Cruz or even someone like a Marjorie Taylor Greene says, yeah, there's something to that, I think what they mean is that's the kind of thing Democrats would do, or that's the kind of thing Hillary and Bill Clinton would do. So this is why we don't like them. So even if you point out, well, there is no conspiracy at the pizzeria, that's kind of irrelevant. It's whether it's true or not is not the point. It's that we don't trust the Democrats, and this is true for most conspiracy theories. That they have to do with power, who has it, who doesn't, and who thinks somebody else has power and what they're doing with it. So it could be corporate power that people are suspicious of, like a lot of the anti-vaxxers are suspicious of big pharma. Somebody's making money on those vaccines. I don't trust them. Or big government. Conservatives tend to distrust big government. Liberals tend to distrust big corporations. So because of the fear of power and control, so much of the narrative around vaccines and masks is about power and control. They're trying to control us, right? And so that's, again, the specifics are kind of a proxy stand-in for something else that's lying deep beneath that tags people's emotions and gets them to believe it.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, I mean, you mentioned a lot about the right and that kind of brand of conspiracism, but there's, I don't know if it's fair to call it an equivalent brand, but there's certainly a potent brand of that sort of thing on the other end. And it seems like the concern is the same. It's about power. It's just kind of,
yes.
It's pointing in different directions, but it's really all about, we can't let them take over whatever. And I'm curious, right. I'm curious about, there must be some human thing that's just connecting all of us with that sort of, that fear, and that there's kind of a human thing going on, I feel like. And I'm curious what you think in terms of the different ways that those things manifest is really interesting.
Yes, I think there is an element there. That my second component of my belief module for conspiracies is tribal conspiracism. That is, we're social creatures. We want to belong to a group. Starting with our family and friends and extended family and so on. But then it goes out to our clan or tribe or political party or religious group or whatever. And so conspiracy theories that reinforce our group's belief, our tribe, and denounces the other tribe as being not just wrong, but immoral, evil people. And we've seen this, again, more polarized in political culture and social groups today, more than ever before, is super polarized, such that congressmen on the other side of the aisle are not just wrong. We don't just disagree with them. They're evil, and we have to denounce them, can't talk to them. Much of that is fueled by social media and talk radio and talk television and so on. That just makes it worse. But it's tapping something in human psychology having to do with tribalism, and that it's so easy to have high sympathy for your group and high enmity for the other group. And that's very troubling for going forward into the next election.
Dr. Shermer, I have a question for you because, what is actually considered a conspiracy theory sometimes seems to be mediated by tribalism itself. So I can think of one very good example, which came up this year in 2021. And that was the idea of the lab leak hypothesis when it came to the origins of COVID-19.
Right.
It was considered a conspiracy until it wasn't, until it was a plausible hypothesis. And how that became not a lightning rod in public discourse was very interesting because we saw it happen in real time. And what was once a far-right conspiracy all of a sudden became a very plausible hypothesis on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine, entertained by the New Yorker, and then talked about by Jon Stewart. And so it changed. It really went from conspiracy to plausible theory in overnight, and we all saw that happen. What is going on there?
Yeah, that's interesting. It is quite telling that it took Jon Stewart to go on a late night comedy show to make it acceptable to talk about again. Okay, so conspiracy theory is, a conspiracy is when two or more people plot in secret to gain an unfair or immoral or illegal advantage over a third party. And so the lab leak hypothesis itself is not really a conspiracy theory, because the most people that think there might be something to the lab leak hypothesis don't think it was a bioweapon that the Chinese secretly unleashed upon the world. Most of them think it was just an accident. So an accident would not be a conspiracy by definition. So we could just take that off the table, unless you want to talk about cover-up. Now, the Chinese may be covering up what happened at the lab. That would be a conspiracy, and therefore a conspiracy theory about it is either true or false, and we can try to get at that. The problem is that the Chinese, you can't really trust the Chinese. So there could be something to that conspiracy theory. I think Matt Ridley and Alina Chen's new book, Viral, it explores this pretty well. I've been stunned by the reviews who accuse them of being conspiracy theorists, which they state right up front, we're not. This is not a conspiracy theory, and it's not at all clear that the zoonotic, kind of spillover hypothesis is true. It's not like 90-10 in favor of the one over the other hypothesis. It's kind of 50-50. It could go either way, as far as I can tell. And that should be okay to discuss. But I'm astonished at the reviews of this book, mostly negative, saying, no, this is a clear-cut case of zoonotic spillover from bats or pangolins, whatever. No, it's not. It really isn't clear if you just look at the evidence. So it should be, the fact that it's not acceptable to even discuss it is troubling.
It's funny because so now there's a kind of there are multiple levels at play, where there's the one thing is having a conspiracy theory of your own and trying to forward that. And then there's just having a hypothesis about something or just an idea about something and it being smeared as a conspiracy theory in order to dismiss it. Yes. So there's all that going on as well, which I feel like the reviews of that book are kind of in the latter camp, where it's, we just can't even entertain this idea for narrative purposes or tribal purposes. So I think that's part of what makes it so complicated. And then, of course, the fact that happens just kind of reinforces the conspiracy theorists' idea of, I must be onto something, right? So there's all this crazy echoing and backfiring going on.
Yeah, the third element of my theory of conspiracy beliefs is constructive conspiracism, I call it. That is to say, enough conspiracies theories in the past have turned out to be true that it pays to be constructively conspiracists. That is, just assume that there is a conspiracy just in case, because people really do plot in secret. There really are coalitions operating against each other in competition for power and resources and money and so forth. And so it's unfortunate that, the conspiracy theory tag has become a pejorative. Oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. Or you're just a conspiracy theorist, which equates to you're just a nutball. But no, in fact, there are real conspiracies. And so the question of conspiracy theorizing is, well, is the theory true or not? It may be true. It may be false. Like JFK assassination conspiracy theories, I think they're false. I think I accept the lone assassin there. But Lincoln was assassinated by conspiracy. So the theory about that is true, right? Watergate was a conspiracy. Iran-Contra turned out to be true. And all the, Afghanistan papers, Pentagon papers, WikiLeaks, all the things we've discovered that our government was doing without congressional approval, like warrantless wiretapping, that's against the law. Well, maybe it isn't because Bush changed the law and so on. Those are kinds of conspiracy theories that have turned out to be true. So it's not unreasonable for people to suspect that there might be something up with whatever it is we're interested in talking about. That's normal. And that's actually good because enough of it does happen that we should be a little on the paranoid side. just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Is the tagline there.
Right. Exactly.
A good example of what Angel was talking about was actually happening. You can see that on both sides a little with regard to the critical race theory debate in America. And that was, on the left, they were saying that the consensus was that, the right is that CRT is being taught in school is just a conspiracy theory. They're the ones drumming that up. And then, on the right, generally, people think that the idea of systematic racism in general and other kinds of foundations of CRT is the conspiracy theory. That is the biggest conspiracy. So, you can see how that word and all its implications can be used to basically dismiss one or the other side. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think it's a kind of conspiracy theory that it's not. So with critical race theory, it's not that, make sure I can hear myself here. There we go. It's not that people are still as racist as they were in the 1950s. It's clear they're not. So they've shifted it to this kind of underground, unconscious, systemic, built into the system theory about racism. And so you can deny it all you want. Melissa, you can say, hey, I just don't have negative feelings about people of color. I just don't. And yeah, you say that, but unconsciously you do. And here's a little test: this IAT test, this implicit association test, which has been debunked over and over now for the last couple of years. It didn't survive the replication crisis in psychology, but nevertheless, it's quoted as implying there's this kind of unconscious bias. And then from there, that goes even deeper down the rabbit hole of the systemic built into the system. And that makes it even harder to kind of ferret out, well, where's the problem exactly that needs to be solved where people are being discriminated against? And if you can identify it, if it's something like redlining in real estate or, discrimination in mortgage rates to, people of color or something like that, okay, well, then that's no longer a conspiracy theory. That's a problem that just needs to be legislated or something like that. But when you point that out or try to debate it and they say there's no debate, this is just happening, well, that's a kind of conspiracy theory that is one of the elements of conspiracy theories is that if they're not falsifiable, if there's no way to test it, if there's no way to get at it, then what are we even talking about, right? This is just opinion. And much of, I think, critical race theory is kind of in that element. And so that's one reason why I support the FAIR organization and your activities, is because somebody needs to stand up and say, well, where's the evidence for this? Show us what the problem is exactly. Because, of course, we all want to work toward a more equitable and just, fair society. But how do you do that if we're told you can't do anything about it? It's just systemic and built into the system. But it's like, no, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, there's a kind of racism of the gaps going on slowly as we continue to progress, like, the moral arc, and you mentioned. But there's also the thing of, I remember George Carlin was on Bill Maher at one point, and he was saying some of the usual stuff he says, and someone else on the panel mentioned, conspiracy theory and blah, blah, blah. And George's response was, you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. And I think that speaks to the idea that sometimes, as you mentioned, even in that TED Talk from years ago, that we're pattern-seeking machines. We're kind of evolutionarily programmed to see that face on Mars or to see the man on the moon. And we're kind of programmed to see, our life as a random series of events, but then in hindsight suddenly becomes this perfectly crafted novel that was destined to make us who we are. And that's a lot of it too, seeing patterns and putting it all together into a narrative out of the chaos, So what do you think?
Well, that perfectly describes the police are killing people of color because there's enough videos of this happening that the availability heuristic kicks in, and you think, well, this is a huge problem. I see it seems like every week there's one of these body cams or a private citizen filming some horrible thing, and you see these videos. It's infuriating, and you automatically think, well, 3 dots or 4 dots or 6 dots or whatever is a pattern. And therefore we have a pattern of a deep systemic problem in the police departments across America. And before you know it, you have this huge theory about defunding the police because of this, whatever. Well, you have to look at not the headlines, but the trend lines. I mean, the number of people that are killed by cops in general has been going down for decades. Cops are less racist than they used to be. I mean, it used to be way worse in the 1950s. And, here's another example of my proxy conspiracism is the OJ trial. I mean, OJ was acquitted based on a conspiracy theory. His attorneys floated the idea that the police planted the bloody glove and the blood splatter and the evidence. They contaminated the crime scene with planted evidence. And this resonated with a lot of the African-American community in Los Angeles because that did used to go on. And I recommend this. There's this ESPN documentary series called OJ in America. I think that's what it's called. And it goes back to post-World War II migration from the South of people of color into Southern California, particularly Los Angeles, and how the pretty much all white police responded to that. Not good. I mean, it's pretty bad. So by the time you get to the OJ trial, that conspiracy theory kind of resonated with the jury, even though you could tell it was clear from that particular case, OJ killed his wife. It's obvious. Everybody knows that. But for the jurors, it was like, yeah, but this is the kind of thing the police could have done because they used to do this. So we're going to kind of acknowledge that publicly because it was such a public trial. So that's the kind of thing that, again, you have to look at the details of every case. Clearly, there are some cops that should never have a badge and a gun. They're just badasses and these psychopaths or whatever. They still exist. So, but to me, it's like, well, then get rid of that guy right there in the department. That's the guy. Not like right. Let's accuse everybody of being racist and defund the police. That's not fair to the 99% of cops who are probably not racist. But but 1%. I don't know what the police force is in the United States. It's probably tens of thousands or hundreds. I don't know what. It's a lot. So 1% is enough to get you at least one story a week of some horrific beating or shooting or whatever, that it fits the larger narrative that you, through patternicity, find that connection and think, well, there is a trend there. And there isn't a trend. The trend is in the right direction still.
Well, one of the consequences of your work debunking conspiracies, questioning orthodoxies has led you, I think, to question religion. And there's this idea that I think most recently promulgated by John McWhorter that what we're seeing now in America is a quasi, or actually he just straight up calls it a new religion. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know John pretty well. And I remember when he was floating that idea around. At first I thought, I don't know, if you call everything a religion, then what does that word even mean? Because most religions, they have something like a godhead involved, not Buddhism, but most religions have some sort of a deity or a supernatural element. So it can't mean that. But what he means, I think, does work in terms of as a social organization and structure that reinforces certain beliefs as truths, as non-negotiable truths. I mean, if you think about religious truths, if you're a Christian, you have to believe that Jesus was resurrected after he was crucified and ascended to heaven, and he died for your sins because of original sin and the fall of Adam and Eve and all that. I mean, these are really non-negotiable points. If you don't believe those, then why be a Catholic or Protestant or whatever? Why not just be a Jew or nothing? And so in a way, to ask, did the resurrection really happen? What's the evidence? Who was there? And, who was at the tomb again? And they rolled the rock away and it was Mary and the other two women, or no, it was just the one woman. And somebody saw Jesus on the road afterwards, 3 days later. And all that is really irrelevant to believers. It's a non-negotiable truth. This is just what we believe. Otherwise, we wouldn't be Christians, right? So in that sense, I think McWhorter's accusation that critical race theory and kind of the whole package of the woke ideology and social justice is a kind of religion, because the specific points, like the things we were just discussing, they're really non-negotiable. There's no debate. We know cops hate people of color. That's just a given. Or we know that the government discriminates against women and people, or corporate America discriminates and so on. We know this. And if you say, well, let's debate that, it's like, this would be like debating the resurrection. No, it's not debatable. This is what we believe. And if we didn't believe it, we wouldn't be social justice activists or whatever. And so then if you believe it and you're challenged, you have to just push back violently or aggressively. And if you were in the group and you decide, I changed my mind, I think I don't believe this anymore, then you're punished for dissenting from the orthodoxy. And that's what John's book is about. And I think that's correct. I think that's it's a good analogy or metaphor, if you will. It's a kind of religion where original sin is there built in. We're all inherently racist. Even you guys, all of us, it's just comes with the territory. We're born racist. And so we have to atone for our racism by accepting Jesus as our savior, but not literally. In this case, it would be, accepting whoever the leaders of the, I think John identifies, Ibram X. Kendi as kind of the Messiah of the movement. It's an interesting, it's an interesting analogy. I think it works in that case.
I can certainly, if I remember correctly, you used to be an evangelical Christian. Is that right? Yeah. So
yes, that's right. Yeah. That was long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. But I was. So I do have. I do understand the religious worldview because I believed it for about 7 years. I was pretty serious about it. I went to Pepperdine University. It's a Church of Christ school, and I took courses in the Old Testament and New Testament and the life of Jesus and so forth. I read everything C.S. Lewis wrote, and I went door to door witnessing to people because that's what you're supposed to do if you're an evangelical. You're supposed to evangelize. That's what it means to be an evangelical. And in a way, there's a kind of a logic to it. I mean, if you really believe that there is eternal life, and if you accept Jesus as your savior, you get to go. And then people that don't, you kind of feel like, well, it's my obligation to help these people. I mean, we're talking about eternity. It's a long time,
right? Yeah,
right. So we got to convince them that this is the way, the truth, and the light. For God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son. John 3:16. Those posters you see at football games and stuff. That's kind of the central dogma to it. And I just stopped believing that at some point. So I just quietly gave it up and quit talking about it. But so when people tell you,
most people loudly give it up.
Yeah. Well, back when I did that, the atheism wasn't a big thing. There was no big science religion debate. It wasn't a thing to be an atheist. It was just nothing. And part of it was I had a new social group. I went to a state university for a graduate program in psychology, and there it was irrelevant. Whether people were religious or not, I have no idea. No one ever talked about it. We were just doing science. And so there I realized, when you're not surrounded by everybody who believes the same thing as you, it puts a new light on those elements of your belief. And then I took courses on comparative religion and anthropology, and I went through my Joseph Campbell mythology stage of reading his books, and I realized everybody believes something that they're convinced is their truth, and what's the chances that I'm the one that got it right and all these other people that believe something different are wrong? I thought, I don't know, that doesn't sound very reasonable. And and then the problem of evil always troubled me. Why do bad things happen to good people? And not human evil like genocide or homicide or whatever, because God gave us free will or whatever, and we're sinful. But just natural evil, hurricanes, tsunamis, and childhood leukemia that kills children and just ruins people's lives. Why should that happen? That was troubling to me. So I ultimately just gave it up.
Yeah. So it's funny because we're talking about the analogy of religion to what we're witnessing right now, and I certainly, having been raised Catholic, I can see the same kind of gears turning in people's heads. I can see the similarities in the behavior. A long time ago, before I even knew who John McWhorter was, I was talking to somebody and they said something to the effect of, what they're planning to study in school, and they're gonna do documentary films, and it's gonna be woke as fuck. Like, I remember that specific phrase. And for some reason it triggered me, and I was like, oh my God, I know a religion when I see one, and this is starting to smell like it. And this is a long time ago. This is many years ago. So it's way before the real big awakening. But it's interesting because I feel like you did two things that I think are critical to seeing your way out, right? And the first thing is asking all the right questions, right? The problem of evil, questioning the tenets, and starting to dig in a little bit. But one other thing that I think is an even bigger and more important aspect is you broke free from the echo chamber, right? You started to surround yourself with other people, with other ideas and other perspectives. And that's something that is very consciously fought against in our current culture, right? We want to silo, we want to create bubbles. So I'm curious what you think about that and what can be done.
Yes, that's a huge problem that you've identified it perfectly. And part of the problem is that there's not a centrist bubble what we really need. Just liberals slightly to the left of center and conservatives slightly to the right of center. Where's that bubble? I'm troubled by the fact that so many people who are just concerned about woke racism and wokeism in general, they're turning to Fox News for their alternative. Right. Tucker Carlson is my alternative. Oh my God. Fox News is the out. That's also troubling because that's their own issues over there. So I think that one of the things that FAIR is doing, we're creating a new bubble. A rational bubble. We live in rationality, reason, science, empiricism, and all that. And we just want to know what's true. Not pick sides. And so let's just explore this word for a minute, woke, because I feel like before it became contaminated, McWhorter has a nice discussion about how words go through what Steve Pinker calls the euphemism treadmill, where they're just a descriptive term and people use it, and then all of a sudden it becomes pejorative, and then you can't use it anymore, other than to denounce other people. You're just a SJW or you're a woker, and now it's an insult. So. But if you just want to say, well, we should all be aware of incidences of racism or discrimination, misogyny, and so on. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I wrote a whole book on, this here it is, The Moral Arc, 500 pages of, kind of exploring what's happened over the last several centuries to expand our consciousness to include other people in our moral sphere, to incorporate other humans that should belong in the honorary tribe of our group members that we care about. Yes, that's good. And so to give people, I guess, on the other side who are social justice activists some understanding, when you see these police videos, like the George Floyd video, let's say, it is infuriating to watch. Yeah. And it's like, I want to do something about this. Now, most of us can't do anything about it. I mean, I'm not a mayor. I'm not the chief of police at this department. I'm not a politician, congressman, or senator. What am I going to do? I'm just outraged. I'm going to go down there and I'm going to march. I heard this is March tomorrow. 9:00, I'm going down with my poster and I'm going to hold it up. So I kind of get why people do that. They feel like, well, I want to do something. I can't do anything, technically. So I'm going to just protest. That's what I'm going to do. So I kind of get even the Antifa, which I completely denounce their activities, but I get the motivation. Like, something is wrong here and we want to do something about it. Okay. Well, what should we do about it? That's the question. That's the harder question. And just, breaking those windows at Starbucks is not going to do it.
Right. Exactly.
I actually challenge people to do this sometimes because it seems like, the revolutionary fervor of our time seems to have kind of really escalated since George Floyd happened. But if you go back to, I think this happened in June of last year, if you look at clips of Sean Hannity on Fox News, he was upset. Right after, that night, the coverage, even on Fox News, was that of we need to do something about it. This was unacceptable, what just happened. And I remember maybe like a 12-hour period of what looked like everybody. I mean, if Fox News is agreeing on something, everybody was in agreement that police reform needed to happen. And all of a sudden, everything kind of, that Cambrian woke explosion, at least in the popular culture. I think before that, many of us, probably two online people, had this inkling that things were changing. But it wasn't until post George Floyd that normies, like say my sister, who was never political, came to me and started asking questions. Why is our company, forcing us to post black squares on our Instagram or things like that? And so that's the moment it actually hit the public consciousness, I think, in a way that was more populist. And you started then seeing, things like K-12 education started harping on critical race theory, derived ideas, and we had to elevate racism or like talk about racism in general in almost every facet of life.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I like that Cambrian woke explosion. That's a nice analogy. I may use that. Well, so again, I think, corporations see this. It's like, well, we should do something. Even if they don't, if we think of it more cynically, that they're just doing it for their bottom line to socially signal that they care. But the question is, when you put resources into doing something like forcing all employees to take these training programs. I have to do this at Chapman University. All of us have to take these racial sensitivity and sex and gender racial sensitivity programs online. You can't even hack them anymore. You can't just sort of grind through while you're doing something else. Or because they have a little clock on them and you have to click certain buttons. They kind of force you to really read the scenarios and then click the correct answer, which is always call HR. I figured out. So you see a colleague telling an off-color joke. What should you do? Repeat the joke, tell your friends about it, forward it on Facebook, or call HR. Oh, let's see. What would be the right answer here?
We're becoming a nation of hall monitors. That's what's happening.
It's terrible. No, and the scenarios are, they try to make them diverse and equitable. So, so a female professor is hitting on the male students. Like, oh yeah, I remember that happening. Not. Or a gay, bi, trans person of color is doing something. It's like, okay, come on, what are we really doing here? So, but two reasons to do that: virtue signaling, like we're on board with this, we back it, but also legally. I think corporations and universities are doing this with their employees, so that if something does happen, they can say, "Look, we put that guy through the training program. Here it is. He took it on October 12th at 3:00. He completed it by 6:00. So we're covered, and it protects them legally because there's a lot of lawsuits now. So there is that aspect of it. So, but again, the real question is, does it work? And the answer is apparently not. It doesn't change people's hearts, and whose hearts are already mostly changed anyway. Again, compared to 1950s, conservatives today are far more socially liberal than liberals were in the 1950s. I mean, everybody's had their consciousness raised. I mean, even gay marriage, which didn't change until 2015 at the Supreme Court decision. That's almost a non-conversation now. Even conservatives hardly even discuss it anymore. It's like, well, whatever, dude. Who cares? God loves everybody. Jesus loves gays and straight. Okay, fine. That happened pretty quick. 2011, pre-2011, both Obama and Hillary publicly stated they were against same-sex marriage. Now, maybe they secretly believed it, but didn't know what to say or had to say what their constituents believe. You never know about politicians, but that happened pretty quick. So again, this kind of training programs and this assumption of systemic racism, I just don't think it's true. And therefore, putting people through programs isn't going to do anything. And the people who are still racist assholes or misogynist assholes, they're not going to change because they took some training program. That's who they are, right? Something else will have to change for them. Usually it's something like when they know somebody who is black or Jewish or gay or whatever, and then they realize, oh, well, this is somebody I like, and so maybe I should change my attitudes. And they usually do that quietly in the privacy of their own thoughts, not publicly when they're taking some training program.
But one of the I wouldn't say it's a conspiracy, but I guess orthodoxies that exist today that seems to be unassailable is the idea that any difference that we see has got to be attributed to systematic racism, and almost no other cause is considered. It's, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? It's something that seems to be something that's going on right now. So how do we, try to use reason to to argue against something like that? Because I mean, this seems to be prevailing almost in everywhere you look, whether it's discussions about students, student demographics in K to 12, especially when it comes to very prestigious schools. You start to see it also in, say, representation all across the board, females in science or things like that. How do we use reason to push back on this, or if it's possible?
We have to know what the base rate is. What's the comparison? Sometimes I call this the Jack Benny effect. Jack Benny was a comedian in the 1950s who famously said, when somebody asked him, "How's your wife?" he said, "Compared to what?" If you tell me, "Oh, there was 3 police shootings this week, isn't that bad?" It's like, I don't know. Compared to what? How many was there last week or last month? Or there's only 10% female Google programmers at Google. Isn't that terrible? I don't know. What compared to what? How many are applying? 10% of applicants are female, and they have 10% of female programmers. I'm just making those numbers up, but that would be, you need a base rate to compare it to. And most of these group differences you find are of that nature, that there's some other reason besides obviously misogyny or racism or bigotry in general. That's probably the cause, just vocational interest of what people gravitate to for careers that they want to pursue, or maybe there's a pipeline difference, So, at least in the worlds of science that I travel in, pretty much every academic and scientist I know, every department I've dealt with, they are going out of their way to hire women and people of color and so on. They'll do anything to try. They want to. Not because of affirmative action or what, they want to do that. They want to do the right thing and make it more fair. There just isn't as many applicants. So then you have to shift the discussion away from, well, these people are all racist or they're all misogynist, because that doesn't appear to be the case across the board. Again, you can always find some old guy that's just a jerk and he didn't get the memo. You can highlight them, but they're mostly retiring now. But so then you have to look at the pipeline. Well, why are there not more female applicants in computer programming or physics or engineering? Well, first of all, why are we focused on that end of the spectrum? Why not ask, for example, I posted this graph in my Substack column that I think it was like public administration PhDs. It's like 70-30 female. How come no one said, hey, how come there aren't 50% men as public administration PhDs? Nobody thinks twice about it. And medicine, public health, biology, all of the social sciences and humanities, there's way more women PhDs than men. And now that, after a couple of decades, that pipeline starts to fill up as they apply to get jobs. They become tenured professors. They hire more people. And then you see it more equitable, what we are thinking about equitability. But again, we're focused on just the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, as why are there not more female representatives there? Well, why aren't we flipping that and saying, well, but there are in these other areas. Could it be that women are more interested in these fields and men are more interested in these fields over here? And that appears to be the case, and there should be nothing wrong with that. I mean, you shouldn't force people to pursue some career they don't want to do. And that should be okay. But in today's conversation, it's not. And so again, you could find differences between any groups of people on almost anything. Thomas Sowell always made this point. I mean, you could take like Yankees fans and Boston Red Sox fans and go, oh, there's an income difference. There's something discriminatory. No, just groups differ on everything, and it would be weird. Sowell always pointed this out. It would be weird if you found like two completely different groups, gender, race, whatever, that were exactly the same on everything. That was virtually impossible. And so this overemphasis on group differences is itself kind of a form of racism or bigotry. You're stereotyping. You're saying we're going to judge these individuals by the group that they're in. Okay, that's the wrong direction to go in. And this is my biggest concern about critical race theory is we're so focused on race. The whole point was, from the civil rights movement was quit talking about race. It's irrelevant. It's the least interesting thing I should know about you. But with the current climate, it's now elevated to the most interesting thing I'm supposed to know about you. And to me, that's the wrong direction.
And there are so many misfires that happen as a result. I mean, assuming things, my whole life, people assuming things based on my group identity, whatever group they decide to put me in, they're going to get it wrong, right? I don't like rap music. I like Led Zeppelin, you know?
I got that wrong, by the way.
Really?
I'm the one that got that wrong. He's talking about me.
Right. Yeah. Even Melissa got it wrong. So,
well, that's a generational thing.
You know,
yeah, I'm
right.
amazed you like so you like classic rock.
Yeah, I'm all about 70s rock and all that stuff. I mean, I loved that in middle and high school. I was the weird kid listening to Queen when everyone else was listening to, the music of the day. And it was totally right. And I actually I went to school in that exact window where playing guitar was not cool. Like immediately before me and immediately after, it became cool, and it was cool, but it was just not cool. Like I got nothing. You know, the whole thing about like learn to play guitar to pick up chicks, nothing. So I've always been an oddball in that sense, in all those things. Any expectation of me based on these kind of, higher, more kind of broad and generalized group characteristics, you're going to get me wrong. And so many people get erased in that way. So there's that. And there's also the thing of, which I'm sure you're aware of, any group at all. You mentioned it a little bit, but even if the group is totally made up, like right now in this moment, one thing that I talk about a lot is if we split the world up by what they're wearing right now, like if whoever's wearing a button down, t-shirts, tank tops, no shirt or a dress or whatever, we have those 6 or 7 groups. And then we administer IQ tests. We find out what their income is. We'll find disparities, and it'll make the groups seem legitimate. It'll give the illusion that the groups are somehow it makes sense to group people that way. But one thing that I think complicates this, and you touched on it a little bit, but especially with the systemic racism thing, right, is that we define terms differentlining. We're all walking around with our own definition of things. So depending on what we mean by systemic racism, there could be some merit to it, right? Like redlining would be an example of what I would call a systematic racism, that, even if the mortgage thing, even if one particular agent is not racist themselves, they're operating in a system that is designed that way, right? So I'm curious what you think about how difficult it is for us to communicate because we're all walking around with different definitions.
Yes. Well, and then Melissa touched on that earlier about rationality. One thing is what the political scientist Philip Tetlock called base rate taboos. So we mentioned, I got to know the base rate. Well, there's certain base rates that are taboo to even talk about. So if you want to go down the systemic path and look at, let's say, rates of broken families and children raised by single moms in the African-American community versus the other Asian community or white community, there's huge differences there. And so, but it takes somebody like a Thomas Sowell or a Shelby Steele to point this out, and a little bit John McWhorter, but not quite as much. And his colleague, Glenn Lowry, he really brings this up too. But they're called like Uncle Toms or self-hating blacks for bringing up these topics, or just, he's a black conservative, so he's conservative black, so therefore we can dismiss his arguments. But what they're doing is they're tagging what Tetlock called this taboo base rate. That is, well, maybe pipeline is the way it is going way back because marriage rates have changed so much in the African American community. Thomas Sowell makes this point. He has data, showing that African Americans had pretty much the same marriage rates and raising children in a two-parent home as whites and Asians all the way up to the 1960s. And then that changed. And so the question is, could that be a causal explanation for things down the decades later that leads to these differences? The answer, I think, appears to be yes. I mean, it's just in terms of income differences. A single mom just cannot, have the same quality of life as a two-parent home because of just the amount of expenses that there are and how much money you can make as an individual versus pooling resources together and division of labor in the home. It makes a huge difference. Could that then decades later cause some of these differences? Well, okay, so you can debate this, and I think there might be something to it, but maybe there's some legitimate criticisms. But the larger point is that that's not considered a topic that we can even discuss. Because Soul cites that study by Daniel Patrick Moynihan in 1963, in which he identified that 23 or 25% of Black children are raised in single homes with just a single mom, no dads. And he was concerned about that. He was a sociologist and later a politician. He's like, this could be catastrophic for African-American families going forward. It's now 75%. It's triple what it was in 1963. So Thomas Sowell points this out and going, hey, we should look at this. And almost nobody will even talk about that. So this taboo, base rate taboo, this comparison of numbers and looking at deeper causes. If you want to look at systemic causes, that could be one, family differences, along with the others, government policies from the 30s and 40s and 50s that are maybe still underlying some of these issues, could be. So we should change those if they are. But let's look at all of them and not just pick the ones that we want.
But it seems to me what's taboo is what could be considered to have moral implications. So the kinds of assumptions that are baked into it, that if this turns out to be true, this may imply some sort of moral hierarchy, and therefore it's just better. I think a lot of these, what we see in terms of, say, progressive denial of science, for example, right now on gender ideology, is that just acknowledging sort of genetic or inherent differences, innate differences, in and of itself implies that there's superiority and inferiority baked into that. So for that reason, we have to all kind of walk on eggshells and just pretend that there are no differences whatsoever. And I don't know how that follows. I think there's a strain of thought where it is just so risky to even acknowledge that. So acknowledging that, family structure might have something to do, might be implicating something more, might have moral implications. I think that's what's happening in terms of why people are just shutting down the conversation.
Yeah. I think it's important to point out that when we're talking about these group differences, say, go back to the example of fewer women in STEM, no one's arguing that women are not capable of doing it. They're quite capable of doing it. We know that there's overlapping bell curves here, like on IQs, and that on average, men and women are the same in intelligence. The distribution is slightly different. The bell curve for men is slightly wider than it is for women. So you get more super, 6 standard deviations out from the right geniuses of men than women. But on the other side of the bell curve, more dunces, more lower IQ men than women. So it's just a statistical distribution differences that could have an effect on, again, the pipeline that leads to these STEM jobs, because almost nobody can do like theoretical physics at Caltech and MIT. I mean, it's like 0.00001% of the world's population would be qualified to do this. And so who's the pool that you're selecting from? Well, there's not going to be very many, right? And there's going to be slightly more men than women in that pool just on that kind of statistical distribution. Okay, that's one argument. This is the argument that Larry Summers made and that got him fired at Harvard. He was essentially echoing that argument. But the counter to that is that it may not be that at all. It may just be interest differences, vocational interest differences. So we know that, for example, that girls are more interested in playing with people toys and boys are more interested in playing with things toys, mechanical toys, something like that. So here's the evolutionary psych explanation for these differences down the pipeline is that girls, as they get older, gravitate toward careers and professions that are more people-oriented: medicine, health, public administration, biology, sociology, psychology, anthropology, psychiatry, and so on. And men gravitate more toward things, so computers and engineering and STEM type fields. Okay, so again, it has nothing to do with talent or who can do what or ability. It just has to do what you're interested in spending 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week for the rest of your life doing. You really better like it. And if you don't like it, then don't do it. It doesn't make for a good quality life. Regardless of what the activists say you should be doing, you should do what you want to do. And again, overlapping bell curves, Plenty of women can run Fortune 500 companies. They can run countries like Angela Merkel did for 19 or 16 years, 19 years, whatever it was. They're quite capable of doing it. It's just that there's a vocational interest differences. And we know from studies showing that when you give middle school kids, so this would be 7th and 8th grade, vocational interest tests, and you see how it breaks down what they're interested in, and then you see what they actually end up doing like 20 years later, it's the same. So they're just pursuing paths in life that resonate more with them, and there should be nothing wrong with that. And we should be able to discuss that.
Right. You can say all that, but someone is still like the Kathy Newmans of the world are still going to say, so what you're really saying is, it doesn't really matter.
Well, and just to bulletproof you a little bit there, Michael, I'm sure that all of what you just said doesn't discount the fact that there would be, maybe a climate of a kind of boys club in certain professions, certain pursuits that would make it, give a chilling effect to women joining. I'm sure you acknowledge all of this.
I'm sure that's true. I know that's true. But again, it's compared to what? It's not as bad as it used to be. The old boys club, used to be pretty tight and extensive in the, say, 1950s, 60s. It's not the same now. It's still there in some professions, I'm sure. But again, we can have two thoughts at the same time. One, things are better than they've ever been, and things still need a lot of work and improvement. Okay. Those could both be true at the same time.
Yeah. It seems like so much of our problem is being unable to hold those two thoughts for any given topic.
Right.
Which actually brings me to, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about skepticism. Obviously, that's such a huge part of all the work you've done and continue to do.
Yeah, here's our new issue, just came out, Skeptic Magazine, right? On the Havana Syndrome. It does not appear that there are acoustic weapons. It appears to be a mass psychogenic illness.
Yeah, another one. It's just like fascinating.
Yeah, another one.
We want every to be real.
I know. Exactly, right.
But, I think, and you've mentioned this before, I think even in a video that you did for FAIR, where self-skepticism is the most important kind, right? We need to kind of always be aware that we are susceptible to, in-group bias and groupthink and just kind of confirmation bias, all that stuff. But it's also just so happens to be the most difficult kind of skepticism to practice, right? It's so hard to see yourself. And that's kind of why, the scientific process is kind of offloading that responsibility to other people. But not everyone has that luxury, right? And kind of just as a, for individuals, how would you recommend, what are some kind of tips or tricks you might have for keeping that self-skepticism machine on at any given time?
Well, first of all, you have to have a subscription to Skeptic Magazine.
I totally nabbed that.
Operators are standing by. There actually is, a skeptical community, a rationality community. There's a lot of pro-science groups. And I teach a course at Chapman University called Skepticism 101, How to Think Like a Scientist. And during COVID, I recorded all my lectures. You go to skeptic.com and just click on the Skepticism 101. You can watch all my lectures. I see you have above your right shoulder, you have Carl Sagan's book. I recognize the spine there, Demon Haunted World. That's one of the books I use in my class. So there's quite a few books along those lines. My book, Steve Pinker has a new book on rationality. It's excellent. How to think critically is what we call it, critical thinking, but rationally, using reason, using science, and so on, to try to get at the truth, starting with the fundamental premise that, I'm not God and you're not either, or the secular version. There is objective truth and I don't know what it is and you don't either. So we're going to have to work together at this by applying the best tools of reason and science that we have. And there are a lot of them, and they're out there. I mean, there's videos and books and articles, magazines, we've really got a handle on this now. Like something new comes down the pike, some new claim, again, QAnon or whatever the next conspiracy theory will be, that I can't anticipate. Well, how should we think about that? Some conspiracy theories might be true. So how can I tell the difference? Well, here's some arguments you can use. Here's some questions you can ask and ways to analyze evidence and so on. And I've been encouraged by the rise of fact-checking sites like PolitiFact and Snopes. It's been around for a while. We do some of this. There's other there's half a dozen of these political fact-checking sites now that fact-check politicians' speeches in real time. And that's, I think, is useful. And a lot of people want to know that. And, so that kind of thing is encouraging, despite the discouraging things, that of the kind of post-truth, alternative facts, fake news stuff we hear a lot about. We can push back against that. And FAIR is doing a lot of that heavy lifting now in this very sensitive area of, wokeism and gender and race and all that. We have to be able to talk about it, and that's the only way forward. If you can't, then you may go down some sidetrack, and you've gone off the rails. You don't even know it because you're not willing to talk to anybody about it.
Right. Yeah. So much of it, I think, is what we kind of highlighted earlier about you suddenly being amongst a different group of people who didn't necessarily agree with you or care about the things you cared about. That exposure is important. And I think part of what we're doing kind of consciously is not allowing ourselves to be exposed to those people. We're doing the cult thing of siloing ourselves off. So, what are some ways that we can actively avoid those things for ourselves?
Yes, well, read op-eds by people you don't like that are in the other newspaper.
Yeah,
I subscribe to. Let's see. What have I got here? I have the New York Times. And I have the Wall Street Journal, right? So I read them both. I add them up and divide by 2 to get the truth.
Triangulation.
Yeah. One is notoriously on the right. The other is notoriously on the left. Okay. So, that's one thing you could do is just try to read what other people are writing, that people that disagree with you. And, try to talk to people that, are actually on the other side. It's hard to steel man somebody's argument if they're not there to correct you, if you're not doing it correctly. Like, I think this is what you believe, Melissa. And you go, no, that isn't what I believe. You've misunderstood me. Oh, let me try again. And then we go back and forth till we get it right at what each of us believes. Well, if you're not talking to anybody, you just think you're steel manning. You're probably not. You're probably just characterizing them in a way that's not fair. So, and the only way to find out is to talk to those people. And so we have to do more of that.
So in light of, all your work in terms of sort of in the skeptic, atheist, secular humanist world, do you still think that a world without religion is better in terms of human flourishing and well-being? And I'm asking because, if McWhorter's thesis is right, that this is just a new religion, is this better than the old religions? Is this, potentially more destructive to the foundation of civilization?
That's a great question. I would say it's possibly more dangerous because we do have a secular government, supposedly, and they are a secular movement, so they could do more damage than mainstream religions, which we've mostly kept in check from doing anything too destructive. The West has become, Western religions, I should say, have become very enlightened. They went through the Enlightenment, so they got rid of the pogroms and witch burnings and the killing people that don't agree with us. Most Christians, Jews, and Muslims today in the West are just they think like you and I do on almost everything, and they kind of silo their religious beliefs in a more private realm, which is where it should be. That's good. Now, of course, not that isn't true across the board, but so Islamic terrorists who believe that they're going to heaven if they commit jihad in a terrorist act. Well, okay, that's a problem. But what McWhorter's identified there is far more pervasive than these easily identifiable, say, acts of terrorists, or if we want to be fair, say the Christians that blow up abortion clinics or something like this, although that doesn't happen much anymore. Something like that. But this is far more pervasive, and therefore the work of FAIR, I think, in ferreting that out and identifying where the problems are is more important than, let's say, what I'm doing with religion, because we've kind of won that battle. Right? I mean, religion as a explanatory model for how the world works is no longer, no one takes that seriously. We have science for that. So what's left for religions to do? Well, the social aspects, they bring people together. They man the soup kitchens. They help the poor. There's still a role for religion in that respect. And most people that are religious, they don't care about arguments for the resurrection of Jesus or the first cause or the fine tuning of the universe. Therefore, God exists. They don't care about any of that stuff. They go because their family members go and their friends go, and there's good music and there's a little moral homily at the end of the preacher's inspiring speech, and then afterwards they hang out and socialize and they get free parking. There's a whole there's a whole social aspect to religion that obviously science isn't going to do that. But it's too much to say that there's a human need for religion because the word is too big. But there's a human need for sociality and social capital, as it's sometimes called, just being with other people. And there's quite a few humanist type groups, atheist groups, skeptics groups, or whatever that hang out, or just rationality communities, just people that are like-minded. And sports does that. Bowling leagues is the model for that. But just whatever it takes. And I think the world would be better in the long run if we didn't have the religious dogma behind our moral values, so that we can reason our way to figuring out what's best for human flourishing. And like the abortion issue, since it's back on the table, I've been writing my Substack column about defending pro-choice, but while acknowledging that pro-life arguments they have some good arguments, but most of them are still making religious arguments. I just passed a Planned Parenthood yesterday on my bike ride, and there they were out there, pray to end abortion. God says, and the religious signs. It's like, that's not an argument, because there may not even be a God. But if there is, where does it say in the Bible, what you're claiming about abortion? It doesn't say that, So for pro-lifers, I would encourage them to have better secular arguments, grounded in evidence, and some of them do, but there, it would be good to keep religion out of those kind of public discussions, because we have to reason our way together towards some kind of. The problem is we have conflicting rights there between the rights of the mother and the rights of the fetus, right? So we got to choose the rights of trans athletes to compete in male to female trans athletes to compete in women's sports versus the rights of women to compete against other biological women. So it's fair, right? So we have to make a political, legal, moral decision here. And if you're bringing in religion, or in this case, woke religion, that's not helpful.
Well, and then there's also the issue of in this case, especially in the abortion case, what's interesting is that the science has actually made the case kind of a little bit more fluid in favor of the pro-lifers, because now we can sustain human life babies can be born a lot more prematurely than previously they could, and still survive and be sustained. So it's interesting that, medicine and the progress of science has actually kind of made that a little bit more fluid, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And it largely has supported the trimester system set up in the Roe v. Wade case, in which it's pretty clear it's not a human life in the sort of sentient, conscious sense. It's not a person legally in the first trimester. If we're going to give the nod to one or the other for rights, clearly the adult woman is a person with legal rights, and so on. And in the second trimester, it gets a little fuzzier after, say, week 24, where it looks like a lot of the cortex is coming online. And so you could make an argument that after week 24 to 28 or so, then probably abortion should not happen unless there's a medical emergency. So that trimester system works pretty well, I think, and the science seems to support that. But again, I think if we reconfigure the whole discussion and get abortion, the word, out of the equation, then people will quit moralizing about it. What's the problem? The problem is not abortion. The problem is unwanted pregnancies. Okay, why are people getting pregnant when they don't want to get pregnant? Okay, now we can talk about educational problem, economic problem, a social problem, and just leave the moralizing out of it, because that's not helpful. Everybody has moral values and they all want to moralize. That's part of our human impulse, but that's not helpful.
Yep.
Just denouncing other people.
Yeah, pro-lifers should be the most pro-birth control if that's the case, right? But that's
totally
what we see. Yeah.
I've written about these, abstinence programs. The joke is, to call people that use abstinence parents, right? Because it's easy to take an abstinence pledge, when you're far removed from the passions of the moment, but then you're in the moment and you're unprepared. And guess what happens? Oh, okay. And so, access to birth control, education about, how it all works, and also some awareness of human nature. Like, you can say now, I'm not tempted by this. I'm just not going to have sex. Yeah. But in the heat of the moment, it's going to be much harder to say that, right? It's like the marshmallow test. If the marshmallow is right there in front of me, I want the marshmallow now. I'm not going to wait for the 2 marshmallows later. Right. So, all of life is kind of a marshmallow test, and there's certain issues like food and sex that are really hard to project your future self far and weigh the consequences of that decision. Really hard to do, especially if you're a teenager or in your early 20s, when those passions run really strong. So preparation.
Your own body's huge. Fighting against you there.
And also economic empowerment of women, women that have education and economic autonomy and independence they practice safer sex, they're less likely to get pregnant and so on and so forth. That's the problem. So let's address that together. Pro-lifers should be in favor of everything I just said. But again, religion corrupts them in that regard. Because, so last Sunday's New York Times Magazine had this cover story, this like 6,000 word essay by this woman who didn't have an abortion. So she had her kid. And the kid's now 20 or whatever. Of course, she loves her son. But the opening paragraphs are like, I went to this religious school and they told us we can't use birth control because if you even acknowledge having birth control, it means you've given in to sin. And so then she tells the story. So me and my boyfriend and his friend, and I liked his friend more than the boyfriend, and then yada, 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 we had sex. And guess what happened? 20 years later, her son's 20 years old. Okay. Gee, that's a shocker. And that's the problem where religion corrupts it there.
Okay, but Peter Boghossian has actually pointed this out in terms of this new religion versus old religions. One of the reasons why he thinks is actually worse is because this new religion of wokeism it has no redemption path. There's no way to just accept Jesus Christ as your savior and be forgiven. Your original sin is always with you, and that is worse.
Yes, I agree with that. That's right. Yeah. Let's see. What would be the pathway? I guess you'd have to, if you're on the woke side, whichever side you're on, you'd have to atone. But even there, when you apologize, we see people that apologize for, making using the wrong pronouns or whatever, and they're not forgiven. They're just denounced even more. So yeah, I think Pete's right in that regard. There's no pathway out of being an original sinner.
Yeah, there's no pathway out. But, just from remembering going to church, there was not really a pathway out of that either. You have to just kind of grovel until you die. And then hopefully the groveling will have gotten to a point where you get, you make it through the gates. But
like that Catholic guilt, right? Did you have, when you were growing up Catholic, did you have a lot of that guilt?
Yeah,
tons
of the panopticon all the time and, that sort of stuff. But yeah, there's a redemption after the fact, right? Like after the finish line, there's the redemption. But in the meantime, it's all groveling. It's all, you're just one step away from completely obliterating any good you've done, and there's this constant re-upping that needs to be done. So it's analogous in that way. I don't think that there's any ultimate redemption in any of it, really. And, I guess there's just more militant forms where, people are particularly mean to each other. But
I think that's where Protestants differ from the Catholics, though.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot less guilt. Yes, Methodist. Also, yeah, my mom was very evangelical.
Methodist.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
But
right.
It was there was a lot less guilt, I think, than the kids who grew up Catholic, especially, very strong.
And you're not Methodist anymore.
No. No, definitely not. No.
How did you get out of, or what led you away from religion?
It was by the time I turned the last page of The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. I knew, because for me it was always the origin of life. Once there was a very satisfying, sort of most parsimonious explanation, that was a house of cards. The base just fell. Once I understood intellectually that just how life could have evolved on Earth without the need for sort of a high intelligence. But that was my my path. Yeah. It was actually very discreet. It wasn't continuous. Some people take a long time to get there.
Right.
Mine was very sudden. It was just that book. And then I was like, okay, yeah.
That's funny. So you don't miss any of the social aspects of your religion? Like your family is still religious or anything like that? Or
no, but I think one of the benefits of the internet is that people who feel alone can connect with and organize with other people who share their own interests. Also, that very same thing is also one of the worst aspects of the internet, that people who feel alone can connect with other people who share their interests. So it's a double-edged sword. I think it's how you use it. But for the most part, no. And it's because also if your family and friends who are religious they don't cut you off. As long as they're like, okay, you can believe what you want or not, but we're still going to be your family and friends. And I think that's very important to being a healthy, to leave that tribe and still sustain healthy relationships everywhere else. I think some of the most bitter people, and some of why it's actually bringing it back to wokeness, why it's so hard to leave, is this fear of being ostracized. And so you see parents not willing to speak up when their kids are being resegregated in schools into racial affinity groups because they still want to be, in the good graces of the other parents who are their friends, who are their neighbors, and they're afraid of losing that social support structure. So the mechanisms of holding people back from leaving religion are actually very similar to what we're seeing in terms of people being afraid to speak up about what they view are actually injustices and very harmful for their children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so much of it is making sure that there are alternatives, viable alternatives to the things that they're really worried about losing, right? That sense of community and camaraderie, that fear of my whole family or my whole friend group is not going to talk to me ever again because I've changed my mind. That's the kind of thing I think we need to find viable alternatives for. And that actually leads us to the last question that we ask all our guests, Michael. We appreciate so much your time and all your insight. But, we here at FAIR, our focus is providing a kind of pro-human alternative to the issues that we've been discussing this whole time. So I want to hear, what does being pro-human mean to you? And how do you think everyday people can take a pro-human approach to addressing these issues, like all the stuff we've discussed today?
Yeah, good question. I think he has to start with what's called methodological individualism in the moral realm. That is, we treat people as individuals rather than members of a group, because the moment you do that, then you've stopped thinking about that person right there. You just put him in this group, and then you have certain stereotypes about the group. Okay, so that's how we normally think. That's kind of our normal impulse that we've been fighting against for half a century. So again, the concern about the woke movement, it's going in the anti-racism movement, it's the opposite direction. It's back to the bad old days. So it has to begin with that, treating people as individuals. But also then if there's going to be a collective or a group, how about just humanity, right? Just humans, period, full stop, the whole thing, all of us together on this, we're a species, we're all from Africa. Dawkins had that T-shirt that I probably shouldn't wear now. I still have it in my closet. I'm afraid to put it on. It says, we're all from Africa. We're all Africans. I don't want to put it on and go, oh, white guy thinks he's from Africa. Oh, yeah. Culturally
that did happen that exactly happened to Richard Dawkins, by the way, on Twitter. That's why I'm laughing.
It did?
It did. And I have a screenshot of the thread. Yep. He was exactly what you just anticipated did happen.
Oh, my God. Well, if he gets reamed for that, then I'm definitely not putting that shirt on. I would have no chance. So that, I think, again, this kind of, bending the moral arc, expanding the moral sphere, Peter Singer's moral circle, whatever metaphor you want to use, just that all people are members of the human group. And therefore, a kind of a universal human nature, a universal human morality, connected to human flourishing. Kind of a utilitarian argument. That is, whatever it takes to increase the number of people and places and times that are flourishing rather than suffering. It's pretty simple. So things that we can do, like increasing wealth and decreasing poverty, that's super important. Public health measures, just kind of going down the line of what it takes to lead a decent life. Starting with just the basics, just 3 square meals a day and a roof over your head, and then you go from there to healthcare and just kind of the basics. That's what we've been doing, for centuries, and we should just keep doing more of that and leave the tribalism out. That's not helpful. And so that's to me, try to take an extraterrestrial perspective. If you look at Earth from an Archimedean point outside of it, well, we're obviously just one species, but very much divided. So that kind of divisiveness, that tribalism has to go.
Michael Shermer, thank you for joining us on Fair Perspective.
You're welcome. Nice to see you guys. Yeah. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to Fair Perspectives. If you'd like to join the pro-human movement, visit us at fairforall.org/join us. You can also support the show by subscribing on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, and by following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. For transcripts of podcast episodes, as well as access to exclusive Fair Perspectives content, visit us at fairperspectives.org. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.